Richard Trevithick was a British inventor and mining engineer from Cornwall, England. Born in the mining heartland of Cornwall, Trevithick was immersed in mining and engineering from an early age. The son of a mining captain, he performed poorly in school, but went on to be an early pioneer of steam-powered road and rail transport. His most significant contribution was the development of the first high-pressure steam engine. He also built the first full-scale working railway steam locomotive. On the 21st of February 1804, the world's first locomotive-hauled railway journey took place, as Trevithick's unnamed steam locomotive hauled a train along the tramway of the Penydarren Ironworks, in Merthyr Tydfil, Wales. Turning his interests abroad, Trevithick also worked as a mining consultant in Peru and later explored parts of Costa Rica. Throughout his professional career, he went through many ups and downs, and at one point faced financial ruin, also suffering from the strong rivalry of many mining and steam engineers of the day. During the prime of his career, he was a well-respected and known figure in mining and engineering, but near the end of his life he fell out of the public eye. Childhood and early life. Richard Trevithick was born at Trevithick, between England.Born and Redhill, in the heart of one of the rich mineral mining areas of Cornwall. He was the youngest but one child and the only boy in a family of 6 children. He was very tall for the era at 6 feet 2 inches, as well as athletic, and concentrated more on sport than schoolwork. Sent to the village school at England.Born, he did not take much advantage of the education provided. One of his schoolmasters described him as a disobedient, slow, obstinate, spoiled boy, frequently absent and very inattentive. An exception was arithmetic, for which he had an aptitude, but arrived at the correct answers by unconventional means. Trevithick was the son of mine captain Richard Trevithick and of miner's daughter Auntie. As a child he would watch steam engines pump water from the deep tin and copper mines in Cornwall. For a time he was a neighbour to William Murdoch, the steam carriage pioneer, and would have been influenced by his experiments with steam-powered road locomotion. Trevithick first went to work at the age of 19 at the East Stray Park mine. He was enthusiastic and quickly gained the status as a consultant, unusual for such a young person. He was popular with the miners because of the respect they had for his father. Marriage and career. In 1797, Trevithick married Jane Harvey of Hale. They raised 6 children: Richard Trevithick, Anne Ellis, Elizabeth Banfield, John Harvey Trevithick, Francis Trevithick, Frederick Henry Trevithick. Career. Jane's father, John Harvey, formerly a blacksmith from Carnhill Green, formed the local foundry, Harvey's of Hale. His company became famous worldwide for building huge stationary beam engines for pumping water, usually from mines, based on Newcomen's and Watt's engines. Until this time, such steam engines were of the condensing or atmospheric type, originally invented by Thomas Newcomen in 1712. And which also became known as low-pressure engines. James Watt, on behalf of his partnership with Matthew Boulton, held a number of patents for improving the efficiency of Newcomen's engine, including the separate condenser patent, which proved the most contentious. Trevithick became engineer at the Ding Dong mine in 1797, and he pioneered the use of high-pressure steam. He worked on building and modifying steam engines to avoid the royalties due to Watt on the separate condenser patent. At Ding Dong, Boulton and Watt served an injunction on him and posted it on the mine stuffs, and, most likely, on the door of the Count House, which, although now a ruin, is the only surviving building from Trevithick's time at Ding Dong. He also experimented with the plunger pole pump, a type of pump with a beam engine, used widely in Cornwall's tin mines, in which he reversed the plunger to change it into a water power engine. the high-pressure engine. As his experience grew, he realized that improvements in boiler technology now permitted the safe production of high-pressure steam, which could move a piston in a steam engine on its own account, instead of using pressure near 2 atmospheric in a condensing engine. He was not the first to think of so-called strong steam. William Murdoch had developed and demonstrated a model steam carriage, starting in 1784, and demonstrated it to Trevithick at his request in 1794. In fact, Trevithick lived next door to Murdoch in Redhill in 1797 and 1798. Oliver Evans in the U.S. had also concerned himself with the concept, but there is no indication that his ideas had ever come to Trevithick's attention. Independently of this, Arthur Wolff was experimenting with higher pressures whilst working as the chief engineer of the Griffin Brewery. This was an engine designed by Hornblower and Maberly, and the proprietors were keen to have the best steam engine in London. Around 1796, Wolff believed he could save substantial amounts of coal consumption. According to his son Francis, Trevithick was the first to make high-pressure steam work in England in 1799, although other sources say he had invented his first high-pressure engine by 1797. Not only would a high-pressure steam engine eliminate the condenser, but it would allow the use of a smaller cylinder, saving space and weight. He reasoned that his engine could now be more compact, lighter and small enough to carry its own weight even with the carriage attached. Early experiments. Trevithick started building his first models of high-pressure steam engines, initially a stationary one and then one attached to a road carriage. A double-acting cylinder was used, with steam distribution by means of a four-way valve. Exhaust steam was vented via a vertical pipe or chimney straight into the atmosphere, thus avoiding a condenser and any possible infringements of Watt's patent. The linear motion was directly converted into a circular motion via a crank instead of using a more cumbersome beam. Puffing Devil. Trevithick built a full-size steam road locomotive in 1801 on a site near the present-day 4th Street at Camborne. Trevithick named his carriage Puffing Devil, and on Christmas Eve that year, he demonstrated it by successfully carrying 6 passengers up 4th Street and then continuing on up Camborne Hill, from Camborne Cross, to the nearby village of Beacon. His cousin and associate, Andrew Vivian, steered the machine. This is widely recognized as the first demonstration of transportation powered by steam. It inspired the popular Cornish folk song Camborne Hill. During further tests, Trevithick's locomotive broke down 3 days late after passing over a gully in the road. The vehicle was left under some shelter with the fire still burning whilst the operators retired to a nearby public house for a meal of roast goose and drinks. Meanwhile, the water boiled off, the engine overheated and the machine burned, destroying it. Trevithick did not consider this a serious setback, but rather operator error. In 1802, Trevithick took out a patent for his high-pressure steam engine. To prove his ideas, he built a stationary engine at the Coalbrookdale Company's works in Shropshire in 1802, forcing water to a measured height to measure the work done. The engine ran at 40 piston strokes a minute, with an unprecedented boiler pressure of 145 psi. Coalbrookdale locomotive. The Coalbrookdale Company then built a rail locomotive for him, but little is known about it, including whether or not it actually ran. To date, the only known information about it comes from a drawing preserved at the Science Museum Museum, London, together with a letter written by Trevithick to his friend, Davis Goody. The design incorporated a single horizontal cylinder enclosed in a return flue boiler. A flywheel drove the wheels on one side through spur gears, and the axles were mounted directly on the boiler, with no frame. On the drawing, the piston rod, guide bars and crosshead are located directly above the firebox door, thus making the engine extremely dangerous to fire while moving. Furthermore, the drawing indicates that the locomotive ran on a plateway with a track gauge of 3 feet. This is the drawing used as the basis of all images and replicas of the later Penn-Widearn locomotive, as no plans for that locomotive have survived. London's steam carriage, the Puffing Devil, was unable to maintain sufficient steam pressure for long periods, and would have been of little practical use. In 1803 he built another steam-powered road vehicle called the London Steam Carriage, which attracted much attention from the public and press when he drove it that year in London from Holborn to Paddington and back. It was uncomfortable for passengers and proved more expensive to run than a horse-drawn carriage, and was abandoned. Tragedy at Greenwich. Also in 1803, one of Trevithick's stationary pumping engines in use at Greenwich exploded, killing 4 men. Although Trevithick considered the explosion was caused by another case of careless operation rather than design error, the incident was exploited relentlessly by Watt and Bolton, who highlighted the perceived risks of using high-pressure steam. Trevithick's response was to incorporate 2 safety valves into future designs, only one of which could be adjusted by the operator. The adjustable valve comprised a disc covering a small hole at the top of the boiler above the water level in the steam chest. The force exerted by the steam pressure was equalized by an opposite force created by a weight attached to a pivoted lever. The position of the weight on the lever was adjustable, thus allowing the operator to set the maximum steam pressure. Trevithick also added a fusible plug of lead, positioned in the boiler just below the minimum safe water level. Under normal operation, the water temperature could not exceed that of boiling water and kept the lead below its melting point. If the water ran low, it exposed the lead plug, and the cooling effect of the water was lost. The temperature would then rise sufficiently to melt the lead, releasing steam into the fire, reducing the boiler pressure and providing an audible alarm in sufficient time for the operator to damp the fire, and let the boiler cool before damage could occur. He also introduced the hydraulic testing of boilers, and the use of a mercury manometer to indicate the pressure. Penn-Widearn locomotive in 1802. Trevithick built one of his high-pressure steam engines to drive a hammer at the Penn-Widearn Ironworks in Merthyr Tydfil, mid Glamorgan, with the assistance of Rhys Jones, an employee of the ironworks, and under the supervision of Samuel Homfray, the proprietor. He mounted the engine on wheels and turned it into a locomotive. In 1803, Trevithick sold the patents for his locomotives to Samuel Homfray. Homfray was so impressed with Trevithick's locomotive that he made a bet with another ironmaster, Richard Crawshay, for 500 guineas that Trevithick's steam locomotive could haul 10 tons of iron along the Merthyr Tydfil tramroad from Penydarren to Abercynon, a distance of 9.75 miles. Amid great interest from the public, on the 21st of February 1804 it successfully carried 10 tons of iron, 5 wagons and 70 men the full distance in 4 hours and 5 minutes, an average speed of approximately 2.4 miles per hour, as well as Homfray, Crawshay and the passengers. Other witnesses included Mr. Goody, a respected patron of Trevithick, and an engineer from the government. The engineer from the government was probably a safety inspector and particularly interested in the boiler's ability to withstand high steam pressures. The configuration of the Penn-White-Darren engine differed from the Colebrichdale engine. The cylinder was moved to the other end of the boiler so that the fire door was out of the way of the moving parts. This obviously also involved putting the crankshaft at the chimney end. The locomotive comprised a boiler with a single return flue mounted on a four-wheel frame. At one end, a single cylinder with very long stroke was mounted partly in the boiler, and a piston rod crosshead ran out along a slide bar, an arrangement that looked like a giant trombone. There was only one cylinder. This was coupled to a large flywheel mounted on one side. The rotational inertia of the flywheel would even out the movement that was transmitted to a central cogwheel that was, in turn, connected to the driving wheels. It used a high-pressure cylinder without condenser. The exhaust steam was sent up the chimney, assisting the draft through the fire, increasing efficiency even more. The bet was won. Despite many people's doubts, it had been shown that, provided that the gradient was sufficiently gentle, it was possible to successfully haul heavy carriages along a smooth iron road using the adhesive weight alone of a suitably heavy and powerful steam locomotive. Trevithick's was probably the first to do so. However, some of the short cast iron plates of the tramroad broke under the locomotive, as they were intended only to support the lighter axle load of horse-drawn wagons, and so the tramroad returned to horsepower after the initial test run. Humphrey was pleased he won his bet. The engine was placed on blocks and reverted to its original stationary job of driving hammers. In modern Merthyr Tydfil, behind the monument to Trevithick's locomotive is a stone wall, the sole remainder of the former boundary wall of Humphrey's Penn-Darren house. A full-scale working reconstruction of the Penn-White-Darren locomotive was commissioned in 1981 and delivered to the Welsh Industrial and Maritime Museum in Cardiff. When that closed, it was moved to the National Waterfront Museum in Swansea. Several times a year it is run on a 40 metres length of rail outside the museum. Newcastle locomotive. Christopher Blackett, proprietor of the William Colliery near Newcastle, heard of the success in Wales and wrote to Trevithick asking for locomotive designs. These were sent to John Whitfield at Gateshead, Trevithick's agent, who in 1804 built what was probably the first locomotive to have flanged wheels. Blackett was using wooden rails for his tramway, and, once again, Trevithick's machine was to prove too heavy for its track. Catch Me Who Can. In 1808, Trevithick publicized his steam railway locomotive expertise by building a new locomotive called Catch Me Who Can, built for him by John Hazeldine and John Urpeth Rastrick at Bridgnorth in Shropshire, and named by Davis Goody's daughter. The configuration differed from the previous locomotives in that the cylinder was mounted vertically and drove a pair of wheels directly with the connecting rods, without flywheel or gearing. This was probably Trevithick's fourth locomotive, after those used at Colebrichdale, Penn-White-Darren Ironworks and the William Colliery. He ran it on a circular track just south of the present-day Euston Square tube station in London. The site in Bloomsbury has recently been identified archaeologically as that occupied by the Chadwick Building, part of University College London. Admission to the steam circus was one shilling, including a ride, and it was intended to show that rail travel was faster than by horse. This venture also suffered from weak tracks and public interest was limited. Trevithick was disappointed by the response and designed no more railway locomotives. It was not until 1812 that twin-cylinder steam locomotives built by Matthew Murray in Holbeck successfully started replacing horses for hauling coal wagons on the Edge Rail, Rag and Pinion Middleton Railway from Middleton Colliery to Leeds, West Yorkshire. Engineering projects. Thames Tunnel. In 1805, Robert Vazzy, another Cornish engineer, was selected by the Thames Archway Company to drive a tunnel under the River Thames at Rotherhithe. The Vazzy encountered serious problems with water influx and got no further than sinking the end shafts when the directors called in Trevithick for consultation. The directors agreed to pay Trevithick £1,000 if he could successfully complete the tunnel, a length of 1,220 feet. In August 1807, Trevithick began driving a small pilot tunnel, a driftway 5 feet high, tapering from 2 feet 6 inches at the top to 3 feet at the bottom. By the 23rd of December, after it had progressed 950 feet, progress was delayed after a sudden inrush of water, and only 1 month later, on the 26th of January 1808, at 1,040 feet, a more serious inrush occurred. The tunnel was flooded and Trevithick, being the last to leave, was nearly drowned. Clay was dumped on the riverbed to seal the hole and the tunnel was drained, but mining was now more difficult. Progress stalled and a few of the directors attempted to discredit Trevithick, but the quality of his work was eventually upheld by 2 colliery engineers from the north of England. Despite suggesting various building techniques to complete the project, including a submerged cast iron tube, Trevithick's links with the company ceased and the project was never actually completed. Completion. The first successful tunnel under the Thames would be started by Sir Marquis Brunel in 1823, 0.75 miles upstream, assisted by his son Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Mark Brunel finally completed it in 1843, the delays being due to problems with funding. Trevithick's suggestion of a submerged tube approach was successfully implemented for the first time across the Detroit River between Michigan in the United States and Ontario in Canada, with the construction of the Michigan Central Railway Tunnel, under the engineering supervision of the New York Central Railway's engineering vice president, William J. Wilgus. Construction began in 1903 and was completed in 1910. The Detroit Windsor Tunnel, which was completed in 1930 for automotive traffic, and the tunnel under the Hong Kong harbor were also submerged tube designs. Returned to London, Trevithick went on to research other projects to exploit his high-pressure steam engines, boring brass for cannon manufacture, stone crushing, rolling mills, forge hammers, blast furnace blowers, as well as the traditional mining applications. He also built a barge powered by paddle wheels and several dredges. Trevithick saw opportunities in London and persuaded his wife and 4 children reluctantly to join him in 1808 for 2.5 years, lodging first in Rotherhithe and then in Limehouse. Nautical projects. In 1808, Trevithick entered a partnership with Robert Dickinson, a West India merchant. Dickinson supported several of Trevithick's patents. The first of these was the Nautical Labourer, a steam tug with a floating crane propelled by paddle wheels. However, it did not meet the fire regulations for the docks, and the Society of Coal Whippers, worried about losing the livelihood, even threatened the life of Trevithick. Another patent was for the installation of iron tanks in ships for storage of cargo and water instead of in wooden casks. A small works was set up at Limehouse to manufacture them, employing 3 men. The tanks were also used to raise sunken wrecks by placing them under the wreck and creating buoyancy by pumping them full of air. In 1810, a wreck near Margate was raised in this way, but there was a dispute over payment and Trevithick was driven to cut the lashings loose and let it sink again. In 1809, Trevithick worked on various ideas on improvements for ships: iron floating docks, iron ships, telescopic iron masts, improved ship structures, iron buoys, and using heat from the ship's boilers for cooking. Illness, financial difficulties, and returned to Cornwall in May 1810. He caught typhoid and nearly died. By September, he had recovered sufficiently to travel back to Cornwall by ship, and in February 1811 he and Dickinson were declared bankrupt. They were not discharged until 1814, Trevithick having paid off most of the partnership debts from his own funds. The Cornish boiler and engine. In about 1812, Trevithick designed the Cornish boiler. These were horizontal, cylindrical boilers with a single internal fire tube, a flue passing horizontally through the middle. Hot exhaust gases from the fire passed through the flute, thus increasing the surface area, heating the water and improving efficiency. These types were installed in the Bolton and Watt pumping engines at Dorlcote and more than doubled their efficiency. Again in 1812, he installed a new, high-pressure, experimental condensing steam engine at Wheal Prosper. This became known as the Cornish engine, and was the most efficient in the world at the time. Other Cornish engineers contributed to its development, but Trevithick's work was predominant. In the same year he installed another high-pressure engine, though non-condensing, in a thrashing machine on a farm at Probus, Cornwall. It was very successful and proved to be cheaper to run than the horses it replaced. It ran for 70 years and was then exhibited at the Science Museum. The recoil engine. In one of Trevithick's more unusual projects, he attempted to build a recoil engine similar to the Eolipile described by Hero of Alexandria in about AD 50. Trevithick's engine comprised a boiler feeding a hollow axle to route the steam to a Catherine wheel with two fine-bore steam jets on its circumference. The first wheel was 15 feet in diameter and a later attempt was 24 feet in diameter. To get any usable torque, steam had to issue from the nozzles at a very high velocity and in such large volume that it proved not to operate with adequate efficiency. Today this would be recognized as a reaction turbine.